Okay, we're gonna try this. So this lesson is what I would be teaching if we were live, but I'm gonna try to record it. That way you can go back and forth and we'll see how this goes. So this lesson is on finding intercepts from equations. So what I mean by that is we are now gonna be looking at linear equations. Okay, one example of a linear equation is y equals 2x minus 10. Another example of a linear equation is 2x plus 3y equals 6. These are both linear, and the way I know that is they have an x and they have a y, and there are no exponents. So if you see an equation that has an x and it has a y, and we're talking about graphing and things like this, we can know this is going to be a line. You probably recognize this as y equals mx plus b. This looks a little bit different, but that's okay. They're both linear equations. They both have an x and a y in them, and the exponents are just 1, or you don't see any exponents in there. So you're going to get used to this idea of when we see these things, these are what we call equations of a line, and we're going to try to graph them. But we are not going to use y equals mx plus b first. We're not going to start there. We're going to start just from finding intercepts. So we talked about what intercepts are. So we have an x-intercept and we have a y-intercept. And there's something really unique about both of those things. So when we looked at the graph today in the Khan Academy, 1, 2, 3, and I'll just go up 1 here, and I'm going to draw a line. Let's say I had this line that had a point here and a point here. This line has 2 intercepts. It has a y-intercept because this is where the line goes through the y-axis. And we have an x-intercept because this is where the line goes through the x-axis. Both the y-intercept and the x-intercept have a coordinate. So the y-intercept, which color? The y-intercept has a coordinate, which this is what we talked about in the Khan Academy, of 0, 1. And the x has an x-intercept of 3, 0. So we talked already about how to list a point. A point has 2 parts, an x and a y, an x and a y. So if I'm going up here, the x is 0, because I didn't move left or right at all from the origin, and the y is 1, because I went up. And if I'm looking at the x-intercept, I use the x first, so I moved over 3, and I didn't go up or down at all. So the x is 3 and the y is 0. It's really important to understand what the coordinates are of the x and the y-intercept. And it's important to know where the 0 is. So what I mean by that is, here's the y-intercept, right? The y-intercept, which one's 0, the x or the y? So this is the point that represents the y-intercept. Which number is 0, the x or the y? Well, it's the x. So for y-intercepts, the x is 0 and the y is something we don't know we're going to find. And for the x-intercept, which one's 0, the x or the y? Well, it's the y. So for the x-intercept, the y is 0 and the x is the number we're going to find. This is a big deal. And this is something you want to continually come back to so you don't get confused. Because once you know, oh, for an x-intercept, the y is 0, and for a y-intercept, the x is 0. That's a really, 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 really big deal. I mean, is it a big deal in the grand scheme of things and in life? No. Is it a big deal in algebra? Yes. So somewhere in your notebook, you maybe want to have that highlighted or marked so you can look back and be like, okay, for the x-intercept, which one's 0, x or y? And for the y-intercept, which one's 0, x or y? And we have it. So why does that matter? It matters because when I'm trying to find the intercepts, so let's say I have this equation and I'm being asked to graph it, but I don't know anything about y equals mx plus b. I just want to graph it. And let's say I'm being asked to graph it using the intercepts. Again, this is the y-axis. This is the x-axis. So I need to figure out, where does this line cross the x and where does this line cross the y? So I'm going to find the intercepts. Hopefully you don't hear the background noise too much. My son's working downstairs. So here's how that goes. To find the x-intercept, we just said that in the x-intercept, the y is 0, and I'm finding the x. So to find the x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for the y and solve for x. So to do that, I'm going to plug in 0 for the y and solve for x. So let's do that. Let's take our equation, plug in 0 for the y. So 0 equals 2x minus 10. And now solve for x. So solve for x, get x by itself. So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. 10 equals 2x. Divide both sides by 2. X equals 5. There's the x-intercept. The x-intercept is always going to look like this, a number and then 0. The number is 5. And the number for y is 0. That was the whole point. We plugged in 0 for y and we solved for x. So there's our x-intercept. Now we're going to do the same thing, but for the y. So we're going to find the y-intercept. So this works in the opposite way. For the y-intercept, x is 0, and I find the y. So for the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. So let's go back to the equation again. So now instead of y equals 2x minus 10, I'm going to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. So y equals 2 times 0 minus 10. This is a lot easier to solve. So y equals 2 times 0 minus 10. So y equals negative 10. Okay, there's the y-intercept. So the y-intercept always has 0 come first. 0 is the x, and the y is negative 10. That is the algebra, that is the math to go through every single problem to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. We're going to do this a few times. Once you find them, go graph them. So let's set up a little graph. Sometimes our numbers are going to be big and we're going to have to go off the graph, but let's see. So the x-intercept was at 5, 0. So this should cross the x-axis at 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The y-intercept is 0, negative 10. Looks like my graph isn't quite big enough, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Here's my y-intercept. I graph those 2 points and I connect the points. And now what I've done is I've actually graphed this line by using its intercepts. So hopefully some of this comes back to you and starts to feel familiar. But let's just go through again. Here's what I'm doing. I'm being given an equation of a line, and I'm going to graph it by finding the intercepts. To find the x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for the y and solve for x. To find the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for the x and solve for y. This spells out the steps. So those are the important points to have written down. Here's how to find intercepts, written in black, written in black. And here's the general form of what the intercepts look like. Okay, let's do a different one. So same process, different example. So here's my example now. Let me make sure you can see. So it looks a little bit different. Things are in a different order. That's okay. 2x plus 3y equals 6. So first I'm going to find the x-intercept. To find the x-intercept, I plug in 0 for y and solve for x. So take my equation, 2x plus 3y equals 6. Plug in 0 for y and solve for x. So 2x plus 3 times 0 equals 6. All I'm doing is plugging in 0 for the y. And now let's keep going. So 3 times 0, let's actually get that. That's 0. Oops. So 2x equals 6. X equals 3. Our x-intercept, the x is 3, the y is always 0. Go back up to this form. Now let's find the y-intercept. Take the equation, plug in 0 for x, and solve for y. So plug in 0 for x, and solve for y. So 2 times 0 is 0. So we get 3y equals 6. Divide both sides by 3, and y equals 2. So our y-intercept always has this form, 0 comma the y. So 0 comma 2. Now we go graph it. Every time you draw a graph, you should draw a bunch of marks, put arrows on the x and the y-axis to show they go forever. If you want, you can label the y-axis and the x-axis. You don't have to every time, just might help you in the beginning. And here we go. The x-intercept goes over 3. Doesn't go up or down. The y-intercept doesn't go left and right, but it goes up 2. And we connect. Boop, 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 boop. Graphed. Okay, let's practice. So we're going to keep referring back to these things. We're going to keep referring back to the general form of the x and the y-intercept and the how to find. That's what we're going to keep going back to. Nothing else is going to change. So let's try a few examples. Let's try this. So again, to find the x-intercept, I'm going to, which do we plug in for? So this is the big thing to always remember. For the x-intercept, we plug in 0, but for what? Go back and look. For the x-intercept, we plug in 0 for y and solve for x. It makes sense. We're finding the x-intercept. If we plugged in 0 for x, then we would always be going through here, and that doesn't make any sense. We want to find out what x number are we going through. So x is the number that should be a number, not necessarily 0. So the x-intercept, plug in 0 for y. So 4x minus 0 equals 12. That's gone. So 4x equals 12. Divide both sides by 4. And we get x equals 3. Okay, x-intercept. The 3 comes first, it's the x. The 0 is the y. Y-intercept, opposite way. Now we're going to plug in 0 for x. So 4 times 0 minus y equals 12. 4 times 0 is 0, so that cancels. So I have negative y equals 12. Be careful. What's in front of that y? It's not just negative. It's like a negative 1. So I have to divide both sides by negative 1. So y will equal negative 12. So the y-intercept, 0 comes first. We plugged in 0 for x, and negative 12 is the y. We graph it. So I know what my points are going to be, so I kind of know how far to go. I'm going to have to go all the way down to negative 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't have to go all the way up to 12 on the top. So get my x-intercept is over at 3. My y-intercept is down at negative 12. Don't forget to connect the points. That's what makes the line. And boom, we got it. All right, let's try another one. Let's try y equals, make it look a little bit different, negative x plus 6. So again, like pause whenever you need, without I'm going too fast. So to find the x-intercept, go through it again. What am I plugging 0 in for, the x or the y? Plug 0 in for the y. So 0 equals negative x plus 6. And just because you have a 0, don't like freak out. Just solve this like you would normally. Need x by itself. So subtract 6 from both sides. -6 equals -x. Divide both sides by that -1. And x equals 6. So the x-intercept is 6, 0. The y-intercept, take the equation and plug in 0 for x. That cancels, so y just equals 6. That's weird, isn't it? So the y-intercept is 0, 6. That's okay. Let's graph it. I'm going over to 6. So the x-intercept is at 6. The y-intercept is also at 6, but the y value of 6. And there we go. Boom. Okay, practice a couple more. So let's practice this one. Y equals 4x minus 8. And let's practice 3x minus 12y equals -12. Take these two, pause it, and then come back. Okay, I'm going to do the work now, but go ahead and pause it and come back. Okay, hopefully you coming back now. So the x-intercept, I plugged in 0 for y, and I solved and got x equals 2. So the x-intercept is going to be 2, 0. For the y-intercept, I plugged in 0 for x, and I solved, I got -8. So I've got 0, -8. I go make myself a graph. Boom, got the graph. All right, second one, go ahead and pause and come back.
So he's writing
But,
something.
hey, honey, I'm filming myself. Almost finished. Okay, so to find the x-intercept, I wrote down the equation. I plugged in 0 for y. I solved for x, so my x-intercept is -4, 0. My y-intercept, I wrote down my equation. I plugged in 0 for x and solved for y. I got y equals 1, +1. Be careful of your signs. So that's going to be 0, 1. Go over and graph. So I've got -4 for the x, 0, 1 for the y, and we look like this. Okay, if you have questions, come ask. You're gonna go do this assignment that's a Google Doc. And I said I would use Kami for it because you can do all the work on your paper. All of this work you can do on your paper. What I wanna see on the Kami is what's your x-intercept, what's your y-intercept, and then draw the graph. So I think even with the crappy Chromebooks, you'll be able to just draw it out as best you can. If not, you can always do exactly what I just did here and take a picture and upload it. But if you want to use Kami to write down the intercept and the other intercept with your finger, that's fine, and I'll figure it out. There are 4 of them. And again, if you have questions, let me know and I will pop into a meet with you.